Hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel, and if it's the first time you've managed to pop along to the channel, well, an extra special welcome to you too, because you see, I'm about to do something that I haven't managed to do before, and that is start a series that I plan to finish. That's correct, a whole series, more than maybe one or two videos, all dedicated to the one subject. And that subject, as you probably have guessed from the title and the intro, was, well, the ZX Spectrum. The ZX Spectrum microcomputer, my first love in video games. So, what I'm going to be doing over the course of the next few months, probably closer to just over half a year, is that every week I will try my very hardest to go through each letter of the alphabet and highlight a handful of games that came out on the ZX Spectrum. So if you're looking forward to this wonderful journey and trip down nostalgia lane for many of us, then just wait until after the titles. Released by Imagine in 1983, Alchemist was quite special, well, especially in my eyes at the time. You see, what we had here was a platformer, but it wasn't just any platformer because you couldn't jump. You had to transform into a golden eagle to be able to fly up and down the levels, something I'd certainly never seen before. Now combat, as you see, my character has just picked up a sword, and unlike traditional combat in many games, even at the time, there was no real action button to use the weapon that you had. It was merely just a battle of hit points versus hit points. The longer you remained in contact with the enemy sprite, the more damage each of you took, until one of you, of course, died. The point of the sword being that you had more hit points, you were stronger with the sword than without it. And the main point of the game was simply to collect 4 scrolls. These were littered of course throughout the maze which you had to traverse, and once you had collected each of the scrolls, then you could take on the final boss, the evil warlock, and win the game. Now as you can see, for 1983 there is a rather lot going on in this game, and I think that's why it captivated me so. But on the other hand, I was also terribly bad at the game. But as most of us already know, back in your childhood, you maybe only had 1 or 2 games to play, so all your time and effort and focus was on just that game. And maybe in a way, that's why it's quite as special in my eyes as it is today. "1984 saw Elite release Airwolf, one of my all-time favourite licensed games. Now I'll be honest, it's a bit of a Marmite game, you either love it or you hate it. And the reason for that is, it was a helicopter shooter, but it wasn't really a shooter. You weren't facing off against enemy aircraft, you weren't even rescuing hostages as such. What you were doing was working your way through a series of levels in what was essentially an action puzzler. Now there's a genre you don't really see much of today. Again, for 1984 though, the graphics were, well, they were stunning. Most people at the time would be still playing on the Atari 2600, as the NES had only just been released in Japan the year before and hadn't made its way over to Western shores yet. But as with all these 8-bit micro games from back in the early to mid 80s and onwards, it was terribly brutal. You really had to be pixel perfect. And considering you were flying a helicopter that, well, didn't hover, which was one of the biggest gripes that most people had at the time, you had to be constantly in control of Airwolf, avoiding the enemy turret gunfire, or just simply not bumping into any of the environment, which would be an instant kill. But what made it great for me was that just one more level addiction that it had. No matter how long you were playing it, if you did just get killed, you would want to dive straight back in and try and work out that puzzle, work out the timing that you required to get through that laser beam or past that turret. And for me, that's always been one of the greatest hooks in gaming. Just one more game. Now, if Nintendo fans had Excitebike, well, back in 1984, 3 years later, the 8-bit micros, or myself to be more accurate, well, we got ATV, All-Terrain Vehicle. Released by Codemasters, it was probably the closest we were going to have to an Excitebike on the ZX Spectrum. Now, I'm a big enough man to admit that Excitebike was head and shoulders above ATV. But for 1987, it was still a wonderful game to play. It had wonderful big sprites, and when you look at the physics that the game displays, well, it's absolutely astounding that this game was released over 30 years ago, so just let that sink in. And again, the real hook is the gameplay. Yes, it's just a simple assault course with your ATV, but it's a short run. It's 60 seconds, 1 minute max, which forces you time and time again just to jump back onto that ATV and try one more time to get through the level, which is something it managed to make me do time and time again. Last up, I'm going to go with a bonus game, Asterix and the Magic Cauldron, released by Melbourne House. And firstly, it's just to say, if you are disappointed with draw times in modern machines, then look at just what we had to endure back in 1986, when we were all desperate to play an Asterix game. And the second reason I've chosen to show this game is because just recently I was having a little chat with Do You Nerd, who have just picked up an Asterix game. Not quite as old and not quite as bad as this one, but I thought they might like to see some of the origins of an Asterix game, because to be frankly honest, I can't wait to see the back of it. Now, as sad as it may be, I'm afraid it's time to bring this wonderful trip down memory lane to a shuddering halt. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had on offer today, and if you have enjoyed it, please hit us with a like, and of course, if you've not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more content like this and of course a lot different, then feel free to hit that subscription button. But most of all, hit me up in the comments. Do you remember 8-bit micros? Were they a part of your life like they were mine? And if not, give me your thoughts on what you've seen today. Because for me, this is all about the comments and the community. So, thank you again for watching, and until next time, cheerio!